Good evening, folks. Welcome to one of the first webinars produced by the Dallas Media Collaborative. And we're lucky to have the Dallas Morning News be the host for this webinar and have the expertise and work that we're going to be studying with Jake Batzel, Audrey McClure, and Jenny Rudolph, all at SMU. I wanted to welcome all of you here this evening. It's going to be a really dynamic conversation about how we're really digging into collaborative solutions journalism and working with young journalists and helping them develop this really important concept in journalism. Jake, you want to move to the next slide so we can kind of talk about the background of all of this. So let me say a little bit about the Dallas Media Collaborative. It really started as a conversation that I had with Carrie Mitchell, who was starting up Dallas Free Press, a nonprofit startup to cover really important issues in South Dallas and West Dallas. And we asked the question, what can we do together, the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Free Press and other news outlets? What can we do together in a much better way that we can't really do separately? And so we hatched the idea of creating an alliance of news outlets that really feel that it's important to be covering some of the most urgent issues across Dallas. And we knew that we wanted news outlets like KERA, D Magazine, Texas Metro News, The Advocate, and other publications and magazines to be involved. But we also knew that it would be incredibly important to have the brain power of local universities like SMU, UNT, and UNT Dallas, and then some of the expertise of nonprofits like the Child Poverty Action Lab and Verdigris Ensemble, which is this cool choir ensemble that's really interested in doing art around civic issues as well. So we hatched this plan to all come together. I think it was back in July of 2019 when some of us actually met at the Dallas Morning News, and it seemed like a very far away goal to me of trying to figure out how to get all of these really super talented people to work together. It probably took another year of talking and planning before Carrie Mitchell actually sent out the first doodle, and Jake tells me it was in November of 2020 to have people meet together, work through some really hard issues like creating a memorandum of understanding, find a really good project manager, and really settle on our first topic, the first thing that we were going to focus on, and that was affordable housing. I think we all know just how incredibly important finding affordable housing is for Dallas and Fort Worth to continue to grow. And so I knew with Jake's involvement that he would really get his students involved in that topic as well. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the other collaboratives across the country. So this is not an original idea, but it's a really good one. We saw how Philadelphia and Charlotte, how their news outlets and universities and nonprofits were coming together. And I think Philly created something called Resolve Philly, and they've really been doing this for 4, 5, 6 years now. So they are seen as the gold standard of this. And then Charlotte came soon afterwards. And Charlotte is actually focused on affordable housing as well. And I want to take just a minute to talk about this because, you know, we grew up knowing and believing that competition is really important in the media, and it continues to be important. That's how we get better at doing what we do. But I just firmly believe that as we look ahead to the future of news, especially local news, that collaboration is going to be a really important ingredient too. And that's, you know, from my perspective, the Dallas Morning News, which is, you know, the main newspaper and news website in Dallas, it will always be strong. It's been around for nearly 140 years, but it may not. It's certainly not the only show in town. And what we can do now is to really help build a media ecosystem. This idea that in order to serve the citizens of our city, whether it's Philly, Charlotte, or Dallas, we really need to come together to create these collaboratives and include the public radio station, the city magazine, some digital startups and minority-owned publications that can really reach important audiences as well and figure out how to work together. It is not easy at all. And Jake and others can attest to how this has been a long, hard road to figure out how to work together. But we really believe that it's going to be worth it. We're right in the middle of our first year, and we have a grant for our second year. So we're really looking forward to supercharging our stories now. Jake, if you want to go to the next slide. So Jake's going to spend some time talking about solutions journalism and what we mean by it and how he began to get his students involved with that.
Great. Well, thanks, Tom. And Tom's right. This dates back even longer than November 2020, when Carrie sent out that doodle poll to the local media ecosystem saying, you know, do you want to be part of this collaborative? What might that look like? Because Tom assembled a bunch of us back in the summer of 2019 from SMU and UNT and all sorts of different media organizations. And there were a couple of representatives from the Solutions Journalism Network visiting the morning news at that time. And it was a pretty cool moment, you know, kind of looking around. I used to be, so I'm Jake, excuse me, Jake Batzel. I'm the O'Neill Chair in Business Journalism here at SMU. Prior to joining SMU in 2008, I was a reporter at the Dallas Morning News. And of course, for most of my career as a reporter, I grew up in a system where cutthroat competition, and even worked, you know, in a 2-newspaper town in Seattle when I worked for the Seattle Times. And so the concept of, you know, getting, you know, representatives from the entire media ecosystem around a table talking to each other about collaborating to solve problems, you know, just would have been unthinkable, you know, certainly a decade ago. And it was a little surreal, but in a really exciting and invigorating way, just to even begin those conversations. But as the conversations progressed, SMU, we were really fired up about being part of the collaborative from the beginning. And my colleague Jacqueline Fellows here at SMU Journalism also was behind it. She and I actually went through Solutions Journalism Educators Training to get up to speed on the core concepts of solutions journalism. And I was able to offer a class, a small seminar class last fall called Business News Seminar, where we were focusing on solutions journalism and affordable housing, and also helping launch the Dallas Media Collaborative, and ended up being a really successful class and meeting all 3 of those goals. So, so 2 of my students in that class, I only had 7 students in the class, but 2 of them are here, Audrey McClure and Jenny Rudolph, and you're going to be hearing more from them here shortly. We really want to hear a lot from them about what they learned from the experience and why they find it appealing, and why solutions journalism appeals to this generation of journalists and media consumers in general. But I first just want to give a brief overview of kind of what solutions journalism is. If you're joining us and you haven't been through training from the Solutions Journalism Network, I know there's plenty of resources out there, and I'm going to share some of those with you. Just to describe a few of the core concepts in the class, and then how we as a class ended up really digging in rolling up our sleeves and practicing solutions journalism as part of a class reporting project. So one of the things that I first learned in my solutions journalism educators training, and then tried to establish as soon as possible during that class with the students, is that first of all, solutions journalism is not just touchy-feely journalism, it's much more complex than that. But that the definition that I see kind of offered the most is that solutions journalism is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. Solutions journalism training materials really emphasize the 4 pillars of solutions journalism as you see them on your screen here. That first of all, solutions journalism needs to spotlight and feature a response to a problem, and how it happened, how that problem happened. Secondly, it needs to provide evidence of results. So not just, oh, hey, here's this new program and here's what it's going to try to do, but actually going to places that have a track record and have evidence of their effectiveness for better or for worse, not just their intentions. The third pillar is that it actually produces insights and not just inspiration that can help others respond. And the fourth piece is that it frankly and transparently discusses the limitations and avoids reading like a puff piece. And that leads to, it was kind of a fun class exercise that in solutions journalism has the network in their training materials has examples of imposter stories. So stories that claim to be solutions journalism, and maybe even the journalists who did them at the time think of them as solutions journalism, but at least in the view of the Solutions Journalism Network, which kind of owns the space, they have a detailed list of imposter stories, things like hero worship and the silver bullet, the solution that's going to solve the problem, and the afterthought. We all see those. We're very familiar with that, and really, frankly, guilty of that as journalists, of kind of tossing in the paragraph at the end of the story that says, "Oh, here's a possible solution," or at the end of a broadcast piece. But really, it's kind of an afterthought and not substantively addressed in the story. And so we established that early on. The class was really had 3 main goals. One was to study solutions journalism and the craft and practice of solutions journalism. And, definitely my students got to know these 4 pillars and got, to be able to more quickly identify the imposters as the semester went on. We also, though, dug into the issue of affordable housing, which we needed to do on a broad basis and also on a local basis here in Dallas, to examine topics like gentrification and redlining and eviction, and specifically how some of those factors were affecting affordable housing in Dallas. So it was a lot to kind of get up to speed on the first 4 to 6 weeks or so of the class. But then, and we also had guest speakers like Tom, for instance, and Carrie Mitchell, one of the co-founders of the collaborative as well. We brought in housing experts and other journalists who had done accountability reporting in the area of housing. David Schechter from WFAA. But what it all added up to is finally about the time fall break was starting to approach, it's like, well, we need to actually go out and do some solutions journalism. We've studied it, we know it, we're up to speed on the issue and here in Dallas. And so how are we going to actually, roll our sleeves up as a class and do some solutions journalism? And so what that ultimately led to was a focus on tiny homes and the role that tiny homes can play in helping to solve the housing crisis in North Texas. And you see there the story as it originally appeared in late December with the lead writers who are here on this panel, Jenny Rudolph and Audrey McClure, and a little photo there of our trip down there, and Jenny and Audrey on the scene doing some of that reporting, and a picture of one of the interviewees who actually lives in an interesting experimental tiny home community that Audrey and Jenny will tell you about here. But then it really, I think, was one of the first solutions based stories to be hatched from the collaborative and contribute to the start of the collaborative and our website, which launched in February. And so we were so excited, first of all, to do this, but then secondly, once the Dallas Media Collaborative's website was live, we were one of the first stories to be featured on the website, and that's the screenshot you see on the right there. So that's kind of an overview of the class and how we went about it. But what I'd love to hear Jenny and Audrey talk about a little bit more is sort of how we arrived at tiny homes as a topic and how we approached our class reporting project. So Audrey, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I think the way that we arrived at tiny homes, because we were talking about a lot of different solutions and there was a lot of ideas floating around, was that I think tiny homes was just the most appealing to the class. And I think that it's something that we've seen a lot of just in generally, like there's a lot of social media accounts that like feature tiny homes, a lot of stories on tiny homes that are more puff pieces, or they're not necessarily presented as solutions to affordable housing, but they're just kind of like cool, neat things that people are interested in. So when we heard about the cottages and other tiny homes as solutions to affordable housing, especially for people who had experienced homelessness or for veterans, I think that really piqued our interest as a class. And I think when we were thinking about possible readers, that really stood out to us as like a good story idea. So the class, what I liked about the class especially was that it was like a very like collaborative approach to a story that could have been giant for one of us to take on, because it wasn't just about like one community, even though that the cottages community by City Square was like the heart of that story. There were other communities like out further away in Dallas. And so we got to break that up within the class so that everyone kind of got to do a little bit of reporting and then bring it all together into this one story that ended up being a lot more than like the sum of its parts. And I think also just having the background of like what solutions journalism was and the pillars really helped us to structure that story as well. Because I think with something like that, it could have been very nebulous and hard to track down, like where do we want to focus on? Like, what is the point of the story? So just having that background and the structure of the 4 pillars, I think was really helpful. And I don't know if Jenny has anything to add to that, but that was kind of where we got started. At least that's what I remember.
Yeah, that sums it up really well. I definitely remember there was also a period of time where we were just brainstorming many different ideas. It took a lot of, I think I remember like we were doing some research and brainstorming amongst ourselves back in the classroom. There was a day where we all rolled up our sleeves and wrote out as many ideas as we could on the whiteboard, and it was looking at which ideas have the most concrete substantive evidence of effectiveness in the Dallas community. And so one that we initially looked at was Operation Tiny Homes, and that was kind of a lead and a break into what exactly the tiny homes can look like. And when we went there, we saw that there was a lot of future planning for the Operation Tiny Homes, but that the cottages specifically at City Square had a proven track record of they were being very effective in improving the lives of the homeless communities they were serving. And so I remember we looked into things like voucher programs and a student angle and what some other approaches could have possibly been, but tiny homes was the one that really stood out as providing some effective results.
Yeah, and just to get everyone on the same page about the cottages, what this is. So this was our attempt to tackle the first pillar, like featuring a proven response to a problem and how it happened. And the centerpiece of all that was we took a class field trip to an experimental community of 50 tiny homes for chronically homeless residents just south of downtown Dallas. That is run by a nonprofit organization called City Square. And City Square, so I want to say they've been running that community for now about 4 or 5 years. And during that class field trip, we had a group interview session with 4 different representatives from City Square, where they shared with us some of the results, including a report of 3 years of results that they compiled regarding the effectiveness of their experiments. And and so so that was just a huge, I mean, that field trip and that interview, you know, really was central. And so the cottages ended up being the real centerpiece of the story, but also a plan development that they have of converted shipping containers is another project that they sort of have in the works. And so while the Dallas Media Collaborative's website was not up and running yet at that time, well, actually, this is where the collaborative aspect really paid off, because we had been working with the collaborative. Tom had come and visited the class. We'd been brainstorming with him as well. And when we initially approached City Square about coming down to work on this story, they had some questions. They weren't they weren't sure that they wanted to really devote a lot of resources to participate in a student journalism program, project. But then that's where we kind of further explained what the Dallas Media Collaborative is and what it was all about and how the morning news was involved. And Tom really supported us and backed us, while we were negotiating with the public relations representatives. And I really think it was crucial, that backing from Tom, to basically get buy-in from City Square to be so generous with us and host our class and, provide our students access to do some reporting as well. So, while, that's one takeaway from me, certainly from a university perspective, is having the backing of the local media community can really pay dividends in ways that you may not have anticipated. But anyway, Audrey, Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about what we learned when we went to the cottages, and how kind of we fit what we learned into the 4 pillars of solutions journalism? Well, I've established the first one, right? That's the response, right? But what were some of the other things we learned and weaved into the project?
Really quick, I really just want to back up that point you made about having like the collaborative as kind of the backup for like approaching people for sources. Because I think as like when you're starting out and you're young and you're a student, you're like kind of overwhelmed by how like unqualified you feel to be approaching these people with these stories that seem so big. But like having the backing of being able to say like, I'm not just a student, I'm reporting for a collaborative that's also working with the DMN and KRA, like was such like a support to being able to actually get entrance into like an organization like City Square. And then once you're in, it's kind of based on the research and everything else that you have and you are qualified to report on. So that was definitely a big thing. And that's something that I think a lot of students who maybe watch this would be able to take away from this, is that having support from someone behind you is like a huge help, but that you are like very qualified to like go and report on these stories too. But City Square, I think part of the reason why it became such a big part of the story was because they had so many experts and like so many people who were like so involved in housing. So like I think one of the biggest insights that we took away was one of the quotes that I think we used, or that was like a lot of the focus of the story, was that like it's just one piece in the puzzle to affordable housing. And that was, I mean, if we're talking about the pillars of solutions journalism, that could also be a limitation, that this isn't going to be this one big solution. But I think that was just a really insightful thing that we learned, that there's really not one solution to all of this, but that through the lens of solutions reporting, you're able to really get a good insight into something that is, one, very useful for, even if it's only 50 people, very useful and life-changing to the people that did experience and are living in the cottages. And also is just like something that isn't necessarily going to be replicable everywhere, but that one insight of there are so many solutions, I think is useful universally, because it kind of scales back the problem of affordable housing from being this one huge thing that needs to be solved all in one blow, something that can be approached piece by piece, and that people, a lot of people with different perspectives and backgrounds, can approach and really tackle in a really meaningful way. And I think that field trip especially was what solidified it for me. Jenny, I don't know, she probably has something to say about that too, but before that, we're like reading a bunch of figures, we're getting interviews from experts, and the figures and everything, they make sense, they're backing up what we're saying, we're getting the evidence. But I think once you actually go and see the community and talk to the people about how their lives are affected, from actually having a home for the first time in decades, that like really brings home like the power of like the story that you're covering. And I think it kind of goes beyond, it almost goes beyond what your like aim is for the story, because if you see journalism as a public service, you see this as a way of amplifying a solution to something that is affecting a lot of people. And I think it changes the way you approach a story too, because you start thinking of how is the story going to be used to really help people who read this, and people who maybe will get ideas and have the ability to help other people who won't necessarily see the story. But yeah, that was my main point. Jenny, I don't know if you had more to say about the field trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Audrey did a great job of touching on some of the insights and then kind of looking into what some of the limitations were that were present. Going along with the other pillars, looking at like the evidence, it was really cool. One of the statistics that we got to find out when we were on that field trip was that 97% of the people who were housed at City Square were able to report that they were never or rarely put in jail, which in turn saved $250,000 in tax dollars over the next 3 years. And so that was just like one of many tangible pieces of evidence we got to discover that showed, hey, this is truly affecting the city of Dallas and the people in this community. And then getting to personally meet with Denise, the woman who's pictured in the top left photo here, seeing that her life truly was changed by the opening of City Square, the cottages there. And so going back to those pillars, it showed that it wasn't just an idea of a positive response to the affordable housing crisis. It was proof of an effective response that truly had impacted people's lives. And then also wanting to touch on some of the limitations a little bit further. The cottages at City Square, they are single bedroom, tiny homes. And so they are amazing for women like Denise, but there are some limitations associated with people who aren't singles or who haven't had children already leave the home. So it doesn't exactly work out for larger families and things like that. And so, as Audrey mentioned, it's not the only approach that's going to solve the affordable housing crisis. It's one of many layers, but it's an approach that we have seen to be effective.
Great. You brought up limitations, Jenny. Audrey or Jenny, you want to talk a little bit? Some of the other, I remember one thing we talked a lot about. One limitation was the permitting frustrations and permitting delays, and then also NIMBYism. Maybe one of you can tackle one and the other.
Yeah. Well, NIMBYism is a term that stands for not in my backyard. We found that it's very common, fortunately, for people to turn their nose up at the concept of having an affordable housing program in their backyard, creating what they assume to be a negative stigma surrounding their community. And so, that's something that did lead to a lot of permitting issues, which I'm sure Audrey can go into further. But there has been pushback in neighboring communities of just people not wanting to house operations such as this.
Yeah, and I remember for the permitting issues, that is like what the people that we talked to seemed like very angry about. Like, of course, NIMBYism is like a big problem for them. But I remember, I can't quite remember who was talking about the permitting issues, but I remember he was like, when you're looking at the story, you should ask why Dallas City Hall doesn't like have initiatives that incentivize people to build affordable housing. And I think that was something that I mean, personally, I'd never really heard of it, because I think NIMBYism is like a good, like easily rememberable, like reason and like name for like something that is in the way. But permitting, I think, is really confusing and clunky and hard for people to necessarily like get into. So that was something, the way, just hearing someone get so upset about it and also realizing like how big of a factor it played was a pretty big insight for me. And I think that's something that is like, has a lot of potential for another solution story, is just going into how permitting and regulations, certain regulations are maybe impacting the ways that affordable housing is being built and who can build affordable housing. But yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully, I think it's pretty evident at this point that this was not an imposter story, that the students were very serious and deliberate in the way that they went about reporting this from a solutions lens, and featuring the response, the evidence, the insights, and the limitations. And I was really proud of the story and their hard work in making that happen and telling that story. And was even more proud once it was also published on the Dallas Media Collaborative's website. And so I guess, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions as well. But if we were to kind of move on beyond the tiny home story and talk a little more generally about the appeal of studying solutions journalism in college or even in high school, one assignment that I think unless the students were just telling me what I wanted to hear, I think the students really liked this assignment, is that they had to interview a reporter, an actual real life reporter who practices solutions journalism, and talk to them about and compare it to traditional journalism, and talk about how it shifted their perspective on how they do their jobs. And so I have screenshots here of the Twitter profiles of the journalists that Audrey and Jenny interviewed as part of the class assignment. And so I was wondering if Audrey and Jenny could talk a little bit about their interviews with a real life in the wild solutions journalist, and what you learned from that experience about how pros are out there doing solutions journalism.
Yeah, well, I can go first. I got the opportunity to interview Josh Hinkle, who is the Director of Investigations and Innovation at KXAN. It's a news station in Austin. And just getting to talk with him was super insightful, learning about some of the work that his team has been doing. So they did a lot of work during the pandemic on a series that looked at solutions for education equality in Austin. And interestingly, they found that when they aired this series of solution stories, it got like millions of ratings that were nearly as high as breaking news or election coverage. And that was just very unheard of and unusual for them. And so they were really seeing that their audiences liked this approach to journalism that wasn't just, as we're calling it today, reporting on the doom and gloom or negative things that were troubling their community, but also looking at some of the positive approaches to it. And so something that they did to kind of start gauging what some potential solutions could be to some of the issues in the education system in Austin, where they would host these community forums and bring in members of the community to share their insights and share what possible solutions they thought could be effective. And so that just really helped them not only report on responses, but touch on that insights pillar we've been speaking about. And then I think something that was really personally applicable to me, and I think is applicable to anyone looking to go into a career in journalism, is news fatigue and burnout can be a thing, because you are facing really sad, sometimes very sad and difficult things that we're facing in the world. And so he personally saw the impact it was having on his newsroom, and saw that it was really helping to alleviate feelings of burnout and news fatigue in reporters, and that they were looking towards what are positive things that are going on in the world, and just bringing about positive change that they got to highlight. And so I thought that was just really great for me, especially as a college senior looking to go into this industry. So, and then Audrey, want to go ahead and talk about Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, that was honestly one of my favorite parts of the class too, because I've never reached out to anyone just to be like, hey, can I talk about what you want to do? So that was a really good way to not just learn more about solution journalism, but just learn about journalism in general. And she had a really interesting story. I found her because she wrote for National Geographic, and National Geographic is just a really cool publication. So she dealt on freelance work. She'd gone to grad school for journalism. And one of the things that she said about solutions journalism that really stuck with me was that it forced rigor. So she was again harping on the idea that it's not puff pieces, it's basically just journalism, but you have to have the facts to back it up. You have to have a lot of different perspectives. And it's also something that helps forge more connections with the community that you're reporting on, because she is currently in the Netherlands reporting as a freelancer, but she was originally from the US and she also went to college abroad. So she had a lot of international experience. And so she kind of knew what it was like to be in a community and have to really integrate yourself and learn about the community, not just report on it, just not like parachute journalism, just go in, get the snapshot, leave, which is kind of like the antithesis of solutions journalism, probably. But hearing her experiences, how she not only went about reporting, but also like found the support network to be a solutions journalist. She's part of this like solutions journalism fellowship class that's supported by SJN. And it basically just pairs you up with mentors and other people around the world who are doing solutions journalism. But that was really helpful to learn how she reports, the different resources that there are if you're an independent journalist who wants to do this. And also just her perspective on solutions journalism, I thought was really interesting and helpful in shifting it beyond what something you're learning in class. Yeah, just say no to parachute journalism. But yeah, just really integrating yourself and getting like meaningful, interesting stories that are helpful and don't fatigue people. I think a lot of the backlash against parachute journalism and other things like that is that it's pretty much quick hits and it's almost always harping on something that's negative. But I think that looking abroad for something that's constructive and really helpful to not just the community that you're reporting on, but other communities is something that's really interesting and helpful. And I think that's the kind of journalist I would like to be, is have my stories be able to be read by anyone and have someone take something out of it. But yeah, and again, just as like a student, being able to talk to someone and get their insight and even like their advice on like how to go about your career and think about what you want from what you're writing was super helpful.
Great. Well, we have some questions coming in, which I'm really glad to see. So I'm just going to try to wrap up my slides here so we can shift to the Q&A portion of our discussion. That is not what I wanted to do. I'll turn my video back on here in a second, but I did want to share, and I'll be sharing the link in the chat here to any journalism educators who might be tuning in here today. Again, solutions journalism has a vast repository of training materials and workshops, both virtual and in-person, fellowships that you can apply for. But one great place to start is the Learning Lab, which has a J-School curriculum builder that'll walk you through the 4 pillars and all kinds of other aspects of teaching solutions journalism. So I will share that here, link in the chat very shortly. Actually, Tom just did. I appreciate that. Happy to talk later with follow up via email or follow up call or Zoom with journalism educators about some of these resources as well. And just the last thing I wanted to reemphasize is, really encourage anyone to follow, anyone who's tuning in today, to follow our work with the Dallas Media Collaborative. You can see it's actually there's the email address for our project manager, Jenny Trejo, who's on the chat, I see. But we're at the Dallas Media Collaborative is dallasmediacollab.com. And we're on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with the handle at Dal Media Collab. Building an audience, as we continue to build and grow the collaborative. So really appreciate everyone's attention to the slide presentation so far. And now I will turn my video back on now that I'm not sharing my screen anymore. I guess we can shift things to questions. We do have a couple of Q&As in the queue here, but Tom, did you want to get things started with a question for Audrey and Jenny?
Sure, but before I do, I just wanted to just say that we're really just starting out, and there's a bit of experimentation here. We're not sure if all of this is going to work, but maybe sometimes the best things are things that are not a sure thing, that there's some uncertainty. And so like the Dallas Media Collaborative, it's doing a couple of layered things. One is to try to strengthen local news in Dallas so that you've got several strong news outlets and universities and nonprofits working with a common cause. And we all agree that trying to examine possible solutions for affordable housing issues is a really important thing for Dallas. And then I think what we're realizing with Jake, Audrey, and Jenny and others' great work is that there's also a potential for a collaborative like this to really spark the imagination and creativity of the next generation of journalists. There's something about this approach that really appeals to younger journalists, not just veteran journalists. And maybe they are the next generation, maybe they are the ones who are going to really figure out how to build strong solutions journalism that will really resonate with readers and bring new audiences to local news, because that I think is what we're all working toward in the future, is to make sure that there's strong support for local news and strong support for the development of the next generation of journalists. And so I guess what I would ask Audrey and Jenny, what is it about this approach that really captured your imagination? And did you recognize that quickly, or did it take a little bit of time for you to understand the potential for this?
I don't know if I recognized it immediately, because I think, especially like being like the age that we are, growing up in the way that we did with like phones. I mean, at least Jenny and I think we're like part of this generation that like grew up without phones and social media, but like when we were like coming of age, we like had a lot of inputs online. We were very much online, and now we're like, we understand what it's like to live your life online on Zoom, especially with like COVID and everything. But I think that after talking to reporters who were doing solutions journalism, after taking the class, and after approaching a story with solutions journalism, I did start to understand that it wasn't like the silver bullet that, you know, solutions journalism tries to avoid. It was something that is sincerely trying to just make stories more, I think, powerful and more like dynamic, more able to reach out to other communities. It's something that is more connected, I think, to like the type of journalism that we're trying to see. There's obviously a lot of pushback against just going in, reporting something negative, and then moving on. That like, if it bleeds, it leads kind of approach to journalism. And I think that for me, after going through everything, I think it really did like just resonate with me as something that like I would like to do more of. And yeah, I like that. I think that especially with like so many stories, like most people our age get news online. So like you see links all the time. You see all these kinds of stories. There's like 5 million links on a single event if you want to like do that to yourself. But I think that if you can trust a source to give you something that kind of encapsulates all aspects of a story or an event, then that's something that you trust, something that you're willing to take more time to read, because solution stories do take more time and they are a little bit longer. But I think people our age are looking for something that's worth that time. They're not just looking for something to be clicked on, sped through, and then moved on from. Like they want something that will really resonate with them and maybe change their perspective on something, or give them some sort of insight that they can take and move on with.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, so much of the way like we're receiving news right now is you're receiving push notifications from your news apps or social media videos that are 15 seconds long. And a lot of times, really all you're seeing is a horrible video of something tragic happening in the world. And then that's it. It's just another video in an endless flood of, you're just constantly seeing more and more of the negative things that are happening in the world. And so for me, really early on when we were taking the class, I just absolutely loved it. I was so interested by it, and I found myself like seeking it out and going and just watching like these 5 minute long, some of them were a little long, but like these really long packages of positive approaches and solutions to issues. And so I think it's specific to our generation because at least so far, our generation has proven to be more focused on social change and some of the awareness there. And so I think that people are going to get tired of just watching, 15-second clips on whatever social media platform, but they're going to want to start to see what are some positive things that can be being done instead.
Great. Well, I think that gets us almost exactly on the dot to our allotted window for questions and answers. The first one I can just quickly address here from Liz Oliphant. Hi, Liz. Nice. Thanks for tuning in. Nice to hear from you. Liz asked, did their stories appear in local major media or only the Daily Campus? And the answer to that is initially it was only the Daily Campus. And then because the Dallas Media Collaborative site wasn't live yet, but then when the site went live in February, it was one of the first stories on the Dallas Media Collaborative website. Some collaborative members have approached me about using maybe parts of the story to repurpose for their media outlets. That hasn't happened yet, but this is kind of an evergreen story where they certainly still can do that. But maybe Tom, you could talk a little bit about what we're trying to do in terms of sharing not just student journalism, but all of the solution stories and just affordable housing stories in general, and what our approach is to sharing content.
Yeah, so we're really trying to build some new muscles here and some processes that didn't exist before. So ultimately, as part of the collaborative, we want to figure out how to work on stories together. So across outlets, is you could have one newsroom or one reporter work with another reporter or another producer for another outlet on a common story right from the beginning. Or you could have an outlet work on its own story, but early on be willing to share what it's finding out with its the other members of the collaborative. And then the other model is just for stories on the subject, just make sure that we're openly sharing it with the members of the collaborative. So in the tiny homes case, ultimately we would like to be in a position where it is shared across different outlets, and we have to figure out how the editing is going to work and how stories will be repurposed, and that's some of the very nitty-gritty details of this. But the whole idea is to share the story far and wide and show the power of having 12 different members in the collaborative share this. We haven't gotten there yet. We have a lot more work to do to figure that out, but I think ultimately we will do it and it will work better.
Great. The next question up in the queue comes from Carrie Mitchell, very familiar to both Audrey and Jenny, because she spoke to our class as well, and I have her speak to my classes all the time. But Carrie's question is, does your college experience with solutions journalism shape what kind of career you will pursue? So feel free to jump in and answer Carrie's question.
Yeah. Well, for me, absolutely. Even in just the following semester after learning about solutions journalism, I've seen it already impacting my own storytelling in other classes, and just a natural interest in kind of leaning in that direction, even if it hasn't been intentional. It just happens subconsciously, I'm noticing, because I really do enjoy that type of storytelling. And then as I'm continuing my career search, it's just been a natural pull towards newsrooms where solutions-oriented journalism is a focus, and seeing it's not extremely common just yet, but it definitely is there, and I think it's only continuing to grow. And so I've been fortunate to just kind of already get to see some of that in my ongoing career search.
Yeah.
Great. I think it definitely like shapes the kind of career you want to pursue. I've been trying to pursue more stories with the Dallas Media Collaborative this semester. But I think also just like working on that story and like going through that class kind of like reinvigorated and like refocused just your general approach to journalism. Because I feel like as a student, like you get caught up in a lot of different roles, you're learning a lot of different things, you're meeting all these different people, and the focus that you come in with like so many times changes, which is natural and good. But I think it can get confusing too, and you can feel pretty lost of like, why am I doing this? What am I doing next? So I think that the class really helps to refocus me and see that, you know, this is something that you can really take and use to help other people. And again, like I just think that structure of solutions journalism, like it's not so overwhelming that like your story becomes like this stilted pre-made thing, but it really helps to just think about how you want to write the story and have it come across as something that's meaningful and understandable for a lot of different people.
Yeah, great. Thanks to you both. I mean, there's obviously so much energy and momentum nationally around not just solutions journalism, but also collaborative journalism, right? And so this was both of those things and is both of those things. You just see every day, you know, there's just growing collaborations. There's institutes that study and bring together collaborative journalism. There's one at Montclair State University, and there's the Collaborative Journalism Summit where, you know, they bring together professionals who are doing this. And so I think from Jenny and Audrey's perspective, the ability to not just have the bullet point on their resumes, right, that they've actually worked with both solutions journalism and collaborative journalism. That's something they can talk about in their interviews, in their job interviews. It's something they can talk about in their cover letters. It's something they can, you know, really talk knowledgeably about, as you can see from this panel. And so I think it's a way to distinguish yourself as a student as well, on top of all of, you know, the more altruistic reasons that we've been talking about today. I think it can really be in the best interest and benefit of student journalists to kind of carve out a niche of expertise that will help them stand out from those who are pursuing more traditional forms of journalism and limiting themselves to that. So there is another question. It's from actually there's two more. Well, Liz again chimed in with a question, and she said, "Are you interested in investigative opportunities related to affordable housing?" Is that I guess I don't know if Jenny or Audrey, if you felt like there were investigative opportunities. I mean, blowing the lid off of tiny homes wasn't really the goal of our project, but either of you could chime in on that, or maybe even Tom about whether the potential to do investigative collaborations as part of this experiment.
I think that would be really cool. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, like I think there's probably opportunity, like not even just like investigative, but just like explanatory, especially for something like affordable housing. It's so confusing. There's so many technical terms and so many like rules that you just don't even know what you don't know. And so I think like something investigative that maybe helps to clarify, like cut through that like confusion of like technical jargon would be super helpful and super cool. And I think there's definitely a need for that, because oftentimes the people who are most impacted by like affordable housing issues are probably the ones who are least equipped with the time and resources to really understand what exactly is going on in city council. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there actually is another question we could move on to here as we get closer towards wrapping things up. But Carrie again asks, what would you say to those who feel like solutions journalism can be used as an endorsement, or can be used as quote unquote endorsement journalism for policies or politicians? What do you think about that, having gone through a solutions class and a reporting project? To some skeptics out there who say, "Oh, solutions journalism, that's just patting public officials on the back, and it's just endorsement journalism."
Yeah, I mean, I think something that you really have to emphasize and that we saw the need for is the very fourth pillar of solutions journalism is addressing those limitations. And sometimes that does require, as we kind of talked about in class, complicating the narrative and acknowledging that one specific solution or one specific response is not going to be the only solution. And so I would say any type of endorsement of a political figure would likely be classified as one of the imposters we spoke about if it was not accurately reflecting the limitations present with any given response.
It warms my heart to hear that answer, Jenny. But thank you. Thanks for that answer. We have a few more minutes if there are any additional questions out there, but at the same time, I think we've covered a lot of ground as well. But Tom, were there anything we haven't covered that you were hoping that we would?
I think I would just echo what Jenny and Audrey and you have talked about, which is to bring the healthy skepticism to these potential responses and solutions, and to really kick the tires and vet them and figure out what the limitations are. Oftentimes these are really good ideas, but they're just not scalable. The tiny homes may be a good example of that, which is they can help 50, 70 people, but it's just a small thing when it comes to the huge affordable housing issue in Dallas. And so what else can we learn from the tiny homes approach that might be scalable? I don't know what that is, but to bring that skepticism as a reporter to that, and not, Jake, you mentioned not to just write puff pieces about it or to take City Square's word for it or some other nonprofit's word for it, but really vet it out. I think that's so important. You had mentioned, I can't remember who, but the idea of the rigorous reporting to this. And so that does take a lot of work. It does take a lot, and one thing I really admired about Jenny and Audrey and their fellow reporters' story was that they actually showed up and spent some time in that development and talk to real people to figure out what they thought about it. Because I've seen other tiny houses stories or container home stories where the reporter didn't actually talk to people who are living in them. So that's just an example of that shoe leather reporting that's not going to change. And as Carrie says, it's essential to solutions journalism.
Absolutely. And we had to fight a little bit for that, or I guess not fight, but we had to be pretty persistent about that. That like, no, we actually want to tour the grounds. We want to talk to people. We appreciated the sort of press conference briefing that we had, but that was, and that's one thing that having the backing of the Morning News and the Dallas Media Collaborative really, I think, helped us with, because without that sort of support, it might have been tougher to get folks to cooperate to provide that type of access.
I guess one last thing that I wanted to say too is we emphasize the fact that truly we couldn't have gotten into City Square without the support of Tom and the Dallas Morning News. There was also 5 other really excellent students in our class who had such a huge contribution, and it truly wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration of so many different journalists, both professionals in the industry and students currently. So, and Professor Batzel's wonderful teaching. So, very collaborative effort.
I appreciate that, but I particularly appreciate you mentioning our fellow students in the class. They're listed at the end of the story, but Alina Bugas, Lucy Burke, Maria Chamas, Ruth Ann Emerson, and Badong Unile all put in a lot of hard work that contributed to the success of this project as well. So, and a lot of them are underclassmen, unlike Jenny and Audrey, who are graduating, who will actually be coming back to campus. So they're going to be hearing from me about getting, continuing to stay involved with the collaborative for sure. So, I think we are just a few seconds away from the top of the hour here. And so I guess, Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, so Jake, And Audrey and Jenny, thanks so much for sharing what you learned in this really great case study, this first story that the collaborative has done. And we appreciate all of you out there for spending an hour with us. We hope that you learned something useful, that you'll continue to dig more deeply into what the Solutions Journalism Network is doing, as well as Montclair State University and the work that they're doing on collaborative journalism. And we hope that you spend some time on the Dallas Media Collaborative's website, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, dallasmediacollab.com, and follow us on Twitter at Dal Media Collab. We really hope to start supercharging more stories, and we're hoping that you will be loyal readers and ask us more questions as we continue this journey. Thank you so much, and thanks to our panelists, Jake, Audrey, and Jenny, and thanks to the Dallas Morning News for hosting this webinar.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much.